Hello, students. Today we begin our exploration of one of the most influential poems of the 20th century, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Published in 1922, this poem didn't simply reflect the modern world, it reshaped modern poetry itself. It emerged from a moment of profound crisis after World War One, when the world seemed spiritually exhausted, culturally fragmented, and emotionally barren. Eliot, in this poem, captured this collective disillusionment with an intensity and complexity that no poet before him had ever attempted. Students, this poem is not just a poem that you read, it is a poem that you enter. It's a landscape of broken images, cracked voices, and scattered memories. It is a text where myth, religion, literature, and personal history overlap and collide. And in that chaos, Eliot invites us to search for meaning. Much like humanity was searching for meaning in the aftermath of war. So, as we begin this lecture, I want you to keep one question in mind. What does it really mean to live in a world where old beliefs have collapsed and new beliefs have not yet been formed? So terrifying, don't you think? This is the emotional and philosophical core of the wasteland. So, this poem is just not about desolation that you'll be thinking is such a pessimistic poem. So, it is just not a pessimistic one. It is also about the possibility of renewal. In the same desert, where nothing seems to grow, he plants small, fragile seeds of hope, mythic, spiritual, and symbolic, which we will unpack as we move through the poem. So, by the end of this session, you'll understand why this work became the defining text of modernism, why it still feels uncannily contemporary, and how Eliot uses fragmentation not to confuse us, but to represent the fractured consciousness of the modern age. So let us step into this wasteland, its voices, its ruins, and its symbols, and begin uncovering the multiple layers that make it a masterpiece of world literature. So, students, let us now enter section 1, The Burial of the Dead, where Eliot opens his fragmented landscape of memory, fear, and spiritual barrenness. So, student, let's begin the discussion on The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. Eliot begins this poem with the startling reversal, as you can see on the screen also, that April is the cruelest month. He is overturning centuries of poetic tradition from Chaucer's celebration of April as a time of regeneration to signal that in the modern period, rebirth is no longer a blessing but a violent disturbance to a spiritually exhausted civilization. You know, after the war and the cultural collapse, spring, which symbolizes rebirth, positivity, it breathes lilacs out of the dead land. And this line is so heavy with symbolism. Lilacs traditionally signify both renewal and mourning. So their forced blooming becomes a painful reminder of what humanity has lost. And in the next phrase, you'll see that you are seeing that mixing memory and desire. It suggests a psychological conflict at the heart of modern existence. Memory revives grief, while desire awakens longing for a vitality no longer accessible, producing emotional turmoil rather than joy. Even the dull roots being stirred by spring rain, evoking a population numb, dormant, spiritually paralyzed, for whom awakening is a form of suffering. Eliot deepens the paradox by claiming that winter kept us warm. This ironic statement portrays emotional numbness as comforting because it allows people to forget. Winter's forgetful snow becomes, you know, winter's forgetful snow becomes a metaphor for the erasure of painful memory and the image of surviving on a little life with dried tubers captures the minimal, half dead existence of a society spiritually starved yet clinging to habit. This now the scene then fractures and shifting abruptly to a new voice, Mary. And this character, Mary, is based on Countess Mary Lariche, whose aristocratic recollections form a fragmented memory collage. This collage is one of the key modernist techniques in the poem. Her lines situate us in pre war Europe, and it woke the Stan bourgeois, the Hofgarten, coffee, casual conversation with the German phrase Bin gar kein Russin, and the rest you can read, asserting identity. And what does it really mean, this line that is mentioned in German? It means, I'm not Russian at all. I come from Lithuania. I'm a real German. So, this multilingual shift signals the cultural pluralism, dislocation, and identity confusion characteristic of modern Europe. Her memory of sledding with the Archduke, feeling frightened as he urges her to hold tight, it evokes a childhood innocence already overshadowed by fear. And then it suggests that even the aristocratic world was unstable beneath its elegance. And when she says, in the mountains, there you feel free, Eliot offers a fleeting image of physical liberation that contrasts sharply with the psychological imprisonment that we feel, that is felt throughout the poem. Mary's final statement, I read, much of the night go south in the winter. It reveals a modern life of restlessness, escapism, and intellectual withdrawal also. A portrait of a fragmented individual surviving through temporary flight rather than finding meaning. Throughout these lines, Eliot employs imagery as we found in, you know, the images like snow, lilacs, mountains, and of course there are allusions, especially to Chaucer and to the broader European aristocratic world which was lost after the war. Then we have symbolism here. The seasons, they're representing emotional states. And of course, there's irony here, paradoxes here, fragmentation is here. They are all the hallmarks of modernist poetry. Thematically, these lines explore spiritual barrenness, collective trauma, cultural disintegration, displacement, memory versus forgetfulness, and the crisis of meaning in modern life. In contemporary times, their resonance remains profound. We too inhabit a world where people often prefer emotional numbness, winter, to the painful work of confronting truth, where memory and desire conflict in an era of rapid change, where identities blur across nations and languages, and where individuals seek comfort in distraction, mobility, or intellectual escape. Eliot's depiction of a fractured, anxious, spiritually starved society mirrors present. mirrors present day experiences of global conflict, environmental crisis, digital overload, and widespread alienation. Thus, the opening of Wasteland was not only captures the moral exhaustion of post-World War One Europe, but continues to speak urgently to our own century's uncertainties, disconnections, and longing for renewal in a world that feels increasingly barren. So now let's talk about the next lines, and I'll try to cover from line number 19 till number 42. Students, this is one of the most haunting, lines from the wasteland. And we'll be covering line by line its meaning, allusions, poetic devices, and how it still speaks to us today. When Eliot's asked, what are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? He's questioning whether any life, hope, or spiritual growth can emerge from a spiritually barren modern world. Here there is an imagery of dryness and infertility which symbolizes from a spiritual, it symbolizes a kind of a cultural decay after World War One. And when he asks, Son of Man, he alludes to the biblical book of Ezekiel, where God asked the prophet to speak to a valley of dry bones. And here, Eliot implies that modern civilization is similarly lifeless, and like Ezekiel, humanity cannot answer because it has it's prophetic vision. And then we see in the lines that you cannot say or guess, for you only know a heap of broken images. These lines suggest that modern individuals exist in fragmentation, with no coherent belief or meaning. Here, Eliot is using imagism and symbolism to express the shattered psyche of the age. And the world he describes is the world where the sun beats, and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. And it's a barren of comfort, spiritual fulfillment, or fertility. And we also see that water, which is traditionally seen or symbolizes as life or renewal, here it's absent. That quality of water is absent here. And here, water itself is becoming a powerful symbol of cultural and emotional drought. And then we hear a sudden contrast. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Possibly a faint shelter, but also an allusion to both punishment and salvation. And here, red is suggesting blood, guilt, or even biblical refuge. And here, a mysterious voice beckons and is asking something, calling somebody that come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different. Now, what is, the voice saying? It's not really promising any comfort. When you come under that red rock, it will not give you any comfort, but it will reveal some sort of truth to you, which, of course, this modern civilization, the people here, they're not ready for. And, it promises not just comfort, but what? Truth. So, not just the shadows of morning and evening, which are symbolic of past and future, but fear in a handful of dust. This line is so chilling. It's an allusion to the Anglican burial service, where it says that ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It reminds us that human life ends in death, insignificance, and moral terror. Here, Eliot is using irony and existential dread to expose the spiritual hollowness of modernity. Next, we see a sudden shift into a German song from Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. I'm not going to read the lines. I may mispronounce some of the words, but you can read it from the screen you have because it's written there. You see, these lines they evoke longing for love lost and home and suggest some kind of an emotional fragmentation and the collapse of European romantic ideals. And here and then this poem turns to memory. You gave me hyacinths. First year ago, they called me the hyacinth girl. The hyacinth alludes to Greek myth. The young hyacinthus, killed and transformed into a flower, and it symbolizes beauty born of suffering and death. And yet, the romantic moment, it collapses. Returning from the hyacinth garden, the speaker is emotionally paralyzed. That's why he says that I could not speak, I was neither living nor dead. It is the state of spiritual numbness that Eliot calls the modern condition, where overwhelming experience leads not to meaning but emptiness. Students, this modern condition, questions can come from this modern condition. What is the modern condition Eliot talks about in the poem? So, next we see the line here is looking into the heart of light, the silence. Now, what is it? What is really happening here? He's using a paradox to show that the poetic device that is being used here is a paradox, is paradox that it is used to show that even illumination brings not knowledge but void, a sort of an emptiness. Finally, the line Ud an leer das Meer, which means waste and empty is the sea. Another Wagner quote returns us to desolation and emotional drought. Altogether, this passage uses allusion, symbolism, imagist fragmentation, and mythic references to show a civilization spiritually broken by war, industrialization, and loss of shared values. And even today, in the world of information overload, ecological crisis, mental fatigue, and fractured meaning, I've already talked about these things before in the previous slide also. You know, Eliot's desert landscape mirrors our own. It's a warning for us that unless we rediscover connection, compassion, and spiritual depth, we too risk becoming a handful of dust. So, students, next we in the next section, Eliot introduces Madame Sosostris, a parody of the fashionable fortune tellers of post World War Europe. And through her tarot readings, he presents a fragmented prophecy of a broken civilization. As you can see that it's written on the screen that Madame Sosostris, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold. This bad cold means she is ill, and at the same time she is prophesizing also. She believes that she has the capacity to or ability to prophesize. So but here having a bad cold means she is you know not really capable to even control her problems, her disease. So here, Eliot is mixing serious tone that she's, clairvoyant, and with dark humor that she has a bad cold also. So this element, what we can call is the device that Eliot is using here. We can call it irony, and he is using it to undercut her supposed spiritual power, showing that even the prophets of the age are flawed and unreliable. And she is described as the wisest woman in Europe, yet this too is satire, right? Suggesting that Europe after the war has lost real wisdom and is depending on these charlatans for meaning. And her wicked pack of cards introducing the tarot And the reading begins. Here is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor, referring to the ancient maritime traders of the Mediterranean and foreshadowing the theme of death by water. The line in parenthesis, those are perils that were his eyes, is a direct allusion to Shakespeare's The Tempest, where transformation through the sea turns a drowned body into pearls. And Eliot uses this to suggest both decay and artificial beauty, and which symbolizes how modern suffering becomes aesthetically packaged. Next, we have Belladonna, the Lady of the Rocks, recalling both the poisonous plant and Renaissance Madonnas, and it symbolizes fatal beauty and dangerous femininity. Right? This is what Yeats also in his poem "A Prayer for My Daughter" warns us and wanted, his daughter to be beautiful, but not too beautiful, to become a cause of misery for others, right? So he you know now he is layering, Eliot is layering myth, religion, and art to show cultural confusion. And here is the man with three staffs, and here the wheel. So now this is the next card he's referring to, and it refers to, it represents struggle, fate, cycles, while this one eyed merchant suggests capitalism, greed, and moral blindness. So now he carries a blank card also, and which is forbidden to see. You cannot really see, you're not allowed to see, and it symbolizes the unknown burden of modern society and the secrecy of its future. Madame Sosotris, then she remarks, that I do not find the hanged man who fear death by water. This hanged man in tarot traditionally it symbolizes a sacrifice, spiritual insight, and rebirth, but its absence now the card is nowhere to be found. Now its absence means modern civilization lacks the redemption it desperately needs. And water, which is usually a symbol of purification, is now a threat. So this reversal is being shown. It is showing how spiritual renewal has become possible. Impossible. She then sees crowds of people walking round in a ring. Now, these crowd of people who are walking around in a ring, this invokes both Dante's Inferno, that's a text. You should know about these. So read something about it. So Dante's Inferno and modern city life, where crowds move mechanically without purpose, symbolizing modern alienation and existential paralysis. See, students, we in the class also we have discussed it many times. Then, don't you ever wonder that why do we actually wake up in the morning early and then get up and then get out, and then again come back home and make start making preparations for the next day? So, what is it actually? If well, is there any meaning to it? Are we do we have any kind of a purpose in our life? Well, that's a very important question, and I think we have delved upon this question, this crisis many times in our class. So here also he's symbolizing this crowds who are moving mechanically, getting up and preparing their lunch and stuffing their bags and then going out, boarding the bus, taking getting out of the bus, and then entering their workplace, and then mechanically for those 12 or perhaps 8 hours, or whatever hours, they continuously work and work and work, and then ultimately we see that what is the purpose of it? That's a question, very big question here. So finally what we see here, that her polite social instructions, as you can read here, if you see, dear Mrs. Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. Now, what is actually this line suggest? It ironically is connecting the grand collapse of civilization with the trivial upper class social anxieties. And it emphasizes, Eliot's theme that society has lost seriousness and spiritual grounding. And now let's talk about the poetic devices that Eliot has used in the poem, or in this section, particular section of the poem that we have been discussing. It includes satire, irony, symbolism, of course, and intertextual allusion. So, intertextual allusion is when there is a reference to another text that was previously been published, that has previously been published, and of course, dramatic monologue. Dramatic monologue, of course, we have studied Browning's poetry, and we know they are all big dramatic monologues. The speaker is talking to himself, and perhaps the listener is present, but he does not interfere in that conversation. So of course there is fragmentation. All these poetic devices, they serve to portray a world that has become spiritually empty, directionless, and skeptical of true prophecy. Even today, now we need to understand this, how this is relevant even today, right? Because in an era filled with horoscopes, online predictions, now we all have apps, and even this palm, your lines on hand, they can be read online. You just need to click a picture and upload it, and it will give you this AI, this crazy AI gives you your horoscope, or it reads your future in seconds. So this frenzy of knowing the future, right? And these conspiracy theories, news overload, and the desperate search for meaning, and even we really don't know what we are even looking for. That's again a crisis, right? So, society, what do we actually do? What do we people do also? That we turn to false prophets, astrologers. Well, if you switch on your TV in the morning, then there is always a channel where there are, some priest, some, fortune tellers are sitting. I'm sorry to say priest, but some fortune tellers are sitting and they are reading your horoscope, right? And why do you actually turn to horoscopes, or these prophets, false prophets? Because you want quick answers. And again, what exactly do you want? You want entertainment, some sort of an entertainment instead of wisdom. So see, this is how the society in which we are living in, it was it prioritized wisdom over knowledge, and then knowledge over information. But we have taken a back turn. We are trying to hoard information, and that information we don't know, or even God knows whether it is true or not. So this WhatsApp university is ruling us. It's giving us all kind of information, so we need to be think, like we learned in the lecture that we attended in during the workshop by Dr. Ajay Verma. He said that there are two types of freedom, and we all feel that we are free to do anything. Yes, we are free, but that freedom is from restraints. Freedom of thought is actually what is required. So this Madame Sosotris also, she becomes a mirror of the modern world, a symbol of our ongoing confusion, anxiety, and longing for guidance in a civilization still struggling to rise from its own wasteland. Now, students, we have come to the last, few lines of this section, the first section, the burial of the dead. And now we have been, encountered with a very famous scene from the wasteland. And Eliot is presenting an unreal city. And it's, this term, this phrase has been taken from Baudelaire to describe modern London as a place of spiritual emptiness. And the phrase "under the brown fog of a winter dawn," he is, using imagery and pathetic fallacy, suggesting industrial pollution and a dull, lifeless atmosphere, replacing the natural beauty of dawn. So when you can read it from the slide, when a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many. So what is actually he is describing is depicting workers commuting to their jobs, yet with a zombie-like quality. And the next line is, "I had not thought death had undone so many," is a direct allusion to Dante's Inferno, comparing Londoners to the souls of the dead entering hell. And he is suggesting that modern life is a kind of a living dead. They're like zombies who don't have any other purpose in their life, and they are moving here and there, wandering the streets aimlessly, purposelessly. So, this is the kind of modern life we are living in. We all the time, just assume, think for a second that all the time we are scrolling, right, on our screen, scrolling down and up on our our phone screen. What for? What are you actually looking? Is there any end to that real world? We really need to come back to the real world in order to save our own self. Be very selfish here, that you want to save yourself, so you have to come out of that virtual world, which gives you all kinds of fake promises, which makes all kinds of fake promises and never fulfills any. You think that maybe after watching that certain reel, or that certain, after making that certain streak, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing or saying this word right, streaks on Snapchats, right? So you think that it will give you a certain kind of a satisfaction, but do you ever feel that kind of satisfaction? This satisfaction never comes like that. And like, even in the class, I always say you have to start reading small stories, pick very thin books, so that you can actually see, enter the world of words, the world of language, the world of actual emotions. Okay, don't want your answers right now, but I really want to pose a question to you. Read anything, whatever, in whatever language you like. Read something for 5 minutes, then just let yourself know the feeling afterwards. You'll see what kind of relaxation, a satisfaction you'll feel after reading for those even 5 minutes. Try this once, and if you want to share it with me, you can do it in the class, right? So now, their size, short and infrequent. When do you sigh with, when do you have short sighs and infrequent sighs are like you're breathing, and there is no pattern in that. It is, so infrequent. What does it evoke? It evokes exhaustion and hopelessness. While each man fixed his eyes before his feet, means they are looking downward, they are looking towards their feet, to the ground, and moving further aimlessly. Now, what does it, how do we actually, when we have a friend, when we are in a group, how do we actually walk? We look at each other, we share glance, we share, gestures, we smile. Okay? We argue also. Then you feel that you are alive. But when you are looking toward your feet to the ground and moving forward, what does it actually show? That you are not really connected with anyone. And there is a mechanical movement through life, which is a prime example of modernist social critique. Now we see that crowd flowed up the hill and down King William Street, again emphasizing dehumanized mass movement. And Saint Mary will not kept the hours with the dead sound on the final stroke of 9. It uses, here a church, the church imagery and symbolism is being used, and it implies that even religion now mechanically marks time instead of offering spiritual meaning. With every bell, you come to know, oh, पाठ का time हो गया. Oh, I have to, light some incense sticks. So you move with the clock. You even offer prayers because you are trained to do this. A rational mind never gets trained, right? But a dormant mind that, you know, does not really use or believes in his own capacity to do anything, to take any kind of decision, to make any kind of decision. That mind can be trained, and all our minds have been trained. Like we have to wake up, we have to wake up at this time, we have to do this at this time. So even religion could not be, you know, even it isn't spared. So the speaker then recognizes someone and calls out, Stetson. An absurdly casual encounter in a city of the dead, made stranger by the line, Who you were with me in the ships at Mail. Now it's a reference to the Punic Wars. If you want to read, want to know about what Punic Wars were, so please Google them. Mixing ancient century with the modern movement to show that violence, war, and human brutality repeat endlessly across time. And this is this grotesque joke about that the crops you planted last year in your garden. Do we actually, sow dead seeds? Do we actually plant dead things in our garden? But that's actually, what is it? It's a dark irony and just surrealism. Now, what is surrealism? When there is an image, or there are groups of, a group of images that do not really connect or gel with each other, but they are still put together. That kind of an abstraction, when it gives meaning to our life, and that life is also strange. So now what is really, questioning, what's the question here is that whether the buried corpse, symbol of lost meaning, lost faith, or cultural decay, has begun to grow again, or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed. It implies that even the possibility of rebirth is fragile in the modern world. The warning is there, keep the dog far hence, alludes to the mythological dog. Now, this dog is Argus. The name is Argus, or grave digging dogs in classical and biblical tradition, representing truth or conscience that might dig up buried guilt or memory. And the final line is, You, hypocrite, lector, mon semblel, mon frere, quotes Baudrillard, which means, hypocrite reader, my likeness, my brother. And then turns the accusation outward, telling us that we too share the guilt and complicity in this cultural decay. Now let's talk about the poetic devices. The poetic devices that have been used here are intertextuality, of course, it is there, right? Symbolism is there, dramatic monologue is there, fragmentation is there, irony is there, and visual urban imagery is there. And they together they create a portrait of modern life, a surreal portrait of modern life as spiritually dead, repetitive, and disconnected. And in the anonymity of city crowds, anonymity means where nobody knows anyone. Even I would not know who I am. Who am I? So, daily corporate routines, emotionally numb modern life. Here, Eliot's vision still speaks to the feeling of living among people yet feeling profoundly alone, reminding us that without reflection, empathy, and moral consciousness, we too may join the unreality of the living dead. Have you ever seen anyone who is working in a private sector, in a corporate world? What do they do? At 8 or 9 in the morning, they are glued. They get glued to their laptops. They take, 2 to 3 minute quick breaks for coffee, right? And then again, they are glued to their laptops. They conduct meetings and discuss God knows what, right? Then at 6 o'clock in the evening, or even later, at around 8 or 9, they come home, see their children, but they are too tired to even notice them, right? Then what do? They pour something in their, they have some kind of a drink, maybe alcohol, maybe any other, to soothe, to calm their mind, to release the tension. And then they say they, tell their even kids also, wives or husbands, what do they tell them? Yeah, please be quiet for some time. I really want to sit alone, because they're too tired of that meaninglessness. And that tiredness of the mind lets them, go to sleep. And for the sleep also, then sometimes need to take pills. So that's the, tragedy of modern man, the so-called modern man in the big cities. So if we want to spare ourselves the citizenship of that unreal city, we need to be awake. Now here, the first section of the burial of the dead, it ends here. Students, there can be a discussion on them. I can really talk about these lines at length for longer period of time, for hours, because that's the condition we are still living in, right? But here I'm ending this discussion. I'll share another video or PPT with you, so that you can study the next sections of the wasteland. Thank you.